us, but welcome to our monthly wastewater scan partner meeting. It's good to see everybody. And yeah, our thoughts are with everybody in Florida and North Carolina and Tennessee and Georgia. Fortunately, our area of Georgia was pretty unscathed, but these storms have been brutal. And so we're thinking of everybody and also know that that may have an impact on operations, and let us know if there's anything that we can do to smooth things and be helpful. But yeah, I saw though even people in Orlando were pretty nervous, which I feel like is unusual. So I'm glad to hear that you're doing okay in Orlando. Okay, so a reminder of who we are. WastewaterSCAN is a national effort based at Stanford to build this national network that you are all a part of, using consistent methods for monitoring diseases in wastewater. I'm one of the program directors. My name's Marlene from Emory University, and Allie on the call, who will be presenting in a minute from Stanford, is the other program director. And you'll also hear from Amanda today, as you usually do on these calls, as she makes sure that they come together and organizes everything. Our partners are Verily and the National League of Cities, and then all of you in Public Works and Wastewater and Public Health. So thank you for making the time for these calls and to come and talk to us about this program and share your feedback. We really appreciate you making the time for it. Program overview, quick update of where we are. So we have 147 plant sampling. That's about 12% of the US population represented across 40 states. And this has not really changed recently. So we'll just have this slide in here as our kind of consistent update, but nothing sort of new or notable here. We're very thrilled that we have this wonderful network that is WastewaterSCAN at this point. Currently monitoring. So right now we have our seasonal and emerging respiratory pathogens. These are super important, especially right now as we're thinking about getting into respiratory virus season. SARS-CoV-2, as always, also influenza A and B, and the H3 and H5 subtype markers right now. RSV, human metapneumovirus, and enterovirus D68. That's our seasonal and emerging respiratory pathogen group. Then we have our important enteric pathogens, rotavirus and norovirus, G2. Outbreak pathogens of concern, we have Candida auris, hepatitis A, and Mpox clade 2. We'll talk more about this in a couple minutes, but just want to point out again, that is clade 2 that we're measuring right now. And then we're also doing SARS-CoV-2 sequencing from a subset of sites, about 30 sites. And then our controls, as always, are pepper mild model virus and bovine coronavirus. We are temporarily pausing the H1 measurements while we redesign the assay, so that's why that's not mentioned in the subtypes right now. Allie will explain a little bit more about that in a minute. A reminder of some of our open access protocols and publications. You will have this slide in your inbox after the meeting. So as always, you can scan these QR codes if you don't get to it quickly, but if you have a particular interest in our protocols or in kind of some of the foundation of one of these pathogens that we're monitoring, these QR codes will take you quickly to sort of some of our publications that describe the foundation that we build those measurements on. And then we want to share some of our kind of most recent new things that are out there. So the most recent new papers, these two we've mentioned before, but they're still pretty new. So this paper on Candida auris, which is looking at the wastewater data nationally from WastewaterSCAN for Candida auris. And then our paper on H5, where we're looking at kind of specific detection of H5 in several communities. That's the foundation of the continuing H5 subtype work that we've been doing. We also have a few recently accepted papers, which we're excited will be published soon. A couple of these already have preprints that are available if you wanted to check them out. So the first one is hepatitis A in wastewater. And so that is accepted at MSphere. And then the other one is HIV, and that is accepted at Applied and Environmental Microbiology. And so you can see the links to the preprints that Amanda has made available in the chat. So you can take a look at those, but the actual final papers will be out soon in those journals. And then we also have a scientific data paper, which is a data descriptor that includes data from the WastewaterSCAN sites across all the different pathogens that we monitor, and is a great resource for looking at the methods that we've used to generate all of that data over time and all of the data that's available as part of that publication. And a just quick reminder that we do have this beautiful page that Amanda created that shows an overview of all of our peer-reviewed literature organized by topics and themes. So if you're like, I want to know what WastewaterSCAN has published about flu, you can go and get not only the links, but a little bit of an overview of some of the key takeaways from some of those papers. And so that link is there, and Amanda also put it in the chat. So lots of things for you to reference. Okay. Now, briefly update on H5 detection in wastewater. So as you know, our prospective monitoring of H5 began in mid-May. Here's the current status update. This heat map shows the red squares are detect, the blue squares are a sample that was non-detect. And as of a couple days ago, we've had 112 positive detections out of almost 10,000 samples that have been analyzed. And we've had detections at 33 WastewaterSCAN sites. So this is a small percentage of the overall number of samples that we've tested that have tested positive for H5. And we are consistently seeing a pattern that these detections are happening in states and generally around areas where there have been reported cattle outbreaks. The one state that has not had a reported cattle outbreak that has had a detection right now is Arkansas. That site in Arkansas is right on the border with Missouri, which is a state that has had outbreaks. So there has been a pattern here that's consistent. And this is showing you kind of geographically where we have had these states that have had detections. Again, Arkansas is the only state where H5 has been detected in wastewater, but has not been reported in any cattle. We have kind of the states with WastewaterSCAN sites where H5 was detected in bold. So we do have a few states with sites that have not had H5 detected, although they may have reported herds. And there are a few states without WastewaterSCAN sites that have had reported herds, so we wouldn't have information about H5 in wastewater from those locations. We have this FAQ for support of understanding, interpreting, and using this data. So this is the same one that we've provided before, but we've got this link. It's available for you. And if you have additional questions that you would like us to include or address in this FAQ, please let us know, because this should be a living document and we're happy to add things to it as needed. Okay, and I'm going to pass it over to Allie.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to give an update on H1. Next slide, please. Marlene. Okay. As we told you guys before and have announced through emails, working really closely with Verily, who have amazing geneticists and bioinformaticists, we designed an H1 assay using sequences that were available through April 2024. And that assay worked really well. And we showed you this data here that's from one wastewater treatment plant in California that we were looking at retrospectively, how the detection of H1 last flu season in yellow suggested that flu season was primarily driven by H1N1, which is consistent with clinical data. And so given that we had these assays that were working well for H1 and H3, we scaled those across the US and began measurements. But we noticed that the H1 assay wasn't really performing very well as expected. And we went into GizAid and downloaded new sequences that had been added in the summer just a few months ago, and noted that there had been mutations in the region of the HA gene that the H1 assay targets. And so for that reason, the H1 assay that we had designed with sequences as recently as spring wasn't expected to work well with some of the new circulating strains. So we sunset that assay, and we're currently working on developing a new one. I think this is a really good learning opportunity, and everybody here should remember that viruses evolve very quickly, especially influenza A. That's what makes it such a challenging virus to health across the country. And we need to continually check assay performance moving forward. And we saw this with like SARS-CoV-2, even when we had the S gene dropouts. Remember that from years ago. So, so that is sort of the status. And this information has also been communicated to everybody via email. Next slide. An update on the Mpox assay for Clade 1. So we have been working on, in collaboration with Verily, conducting R&D to test the MPOX Clade 1b assay that has been published already by others. And we've determined that the assay works well, it's sensitive and specific. And we're still at the same point here in our R&D process that we've talked to you about before. So we still haven't applied the samples to applied the assay to samples retrospectively, but we have been in contact with a plant and a public health agency that we will be working with to test some of their samples retrospectively for mpox clade 1b. We expect all negative results, but just to confirm we're not getting any non-specific amplification. So we have everything set up to do our retrospective testing, but we're just waiting for some supplies to come in from IDT, which some of you on the call might have experienced that waiting feeling before. So that's where we're at. Next slide, please. This is the assay that we have been working with. It detects mpox clade 1b, not all of clade 1. This is the specific clade 1b is the virus that's been circulating in Africa and is of current concern. One of the issues that we talked about last time was that mpox clade 1 is a select agent. And we had been in touch with people at CDC who work in the select agents group. And we had received information about what to do if we ever got a positive and so on. And so working with Verily, we were set up to go ahead if we wanted to, and if you all wanted to scale a clade 1b assay if the R&D worked out and everything looked good to us. And this is something that the White House is very interested in having, and CDC is interested in having. So it's very important from sort of a public health perspective. But subsequently, we learned that there is a little bit of a sort of unanswered question about some of the select agent rules. And so we're waiting for further information from CDC. We want not the news program, it's from a different group, the select agent group. Essentially, we just want to make sure that if for some reason we detect clade 1b, it has no added work for the wastewater treatment plant that the sample came from. And so we're still sorting that out. We think that this is going to be possible, but we're not going to be in a position to scale the assay until we figure out more about the select agent issues. And so I'll move on from there. Next slide. We also wanted to share with you just a few ongoing research projects we're working on. We are working on a small research project on parvovirus detection in wastewater, and also with pertussis, which is the causative agent of whooping cough. And for these two research projects, we have assays picked out, but we haven't yet applied them to retrospective samples. And we've been in touch with public health departments and wastewater treatment plants that are interested and are good spots for doing that kind of research. So as we get interesting results, and after we've shared it with them, with the plants that are engaging with us on research, we'll share those results with you maybe in the coming months. And then last time we also shared with you some preliminary information about the cross-sectional study on ARGs, antibiotic resistance genes. And this little plot here is from the talk last week. So these are the three projects that we're working on right now. Next slide. I think I'll turn it over to Amanda.
Thanks, Allie. So I'm going to give you kind of a brief overview of data in a minute, but I wanted to announce that we are excited to be launching a new public health roundtable series. We've sent a couple of emails out about this recently. We are in just the starting phases of kind of trying to identify which topics, subjects, and meeting, frequency works best for you all. So we see this series as a space for peer-to-peer learning. We get quite a few emails from different stakeholders, both at the utilities and public health, wondering, oh, I've had Hep A detections. Do you know how another jurisdiction has kind of handled this? What have they done? How have they worked on outreach efforts? And so we want to bring all of you guys together around specific topics so you can do some peer-to-peer learning. So WastewaterSCAN will serve as a convener and moderator of these series, but the idea is that at each of these roughly hour-long meetings. 2 to 3 different stakeholders will kind of present what they are doing, what works, what hasn't worked, and opportunities for the future. So I believe Marlene is going to add to the chat the form that we would love to have you fill out. We want to include your feedback in this process. So if you could fill out this form, that would be greatly appreciated. Next slide. Okay, so I'm going to go over the categories. So as a reminder, categories, we use trends, levels, and frequency of detection. We have a whole methodology section on our About page with which pathogens go into which category, but I'm going to save that for later because we have a lot of data to go through. So next. Okay, so I'm going to go over where we're currently at with data over the last 21 days. Currently, SARS-CoV-2 is still in the medium category. There's no statistically significant trend, but we are still seeing medium concentrations. The concentrations have come down quite a bit from what we observed during that peak late summer in July and August. Influenza A, B, RSV, and human metapneumovirus, our other respiratory pathogens that we monitor, are currently in the low category due to not being in seasonal onset. We have started to see a few more positive detections for influenza A over the last couple of months. Influenza B is mostly non-detect. We're only seeing about a 1% detection rate. RSV as well is mostly non-detect, and human metapneumovirus is around 10% detection rate. EVD68, the other respiratory pathogen we are currently monitoring, is in the medium category, and that is due to more than 50% of samples that are analyzed have been positive for EVD68 over the last 21 days. We saw EVD68 go from the low category to the medium category back in August. So we are continually seeing more and more positive samples for EVD68 across all regions in the WastewaterSCAN program. Neurovirus is in the medium category due to medium concentrations and a downward trend. We've had a 100% detection rate for neurovirus over the last 21 days. Rotavirus, we've had a 57% detection rate over the last 21 days. We're starting to see levels continue to come down. Mpox, C. auris, and Hep A are in the low category due to few positive detections. In the last 10 days, we've only had 2 positive Mpox clade 2 detections. In the last 10 days, we've only had 8 positive C. auris detections. And then in the last 10 days, we've had 34 positive Hep A detections, and we're seeing some locations have more frequent detections than others. Next slide. So we're going to dive into SARS-CoV-2 a little bit more. As I mentioned, it's in the medium category due to medium concentrations, but no statistically significant trend at the moment. The plot on the right is our new regional trend plots that you can get off of our website. Maybe Stephen or Marlene could put a link to that in the chat. So here we're able to kind of compare the national trend line, which is in black, to all the other regions that we have sites in for this program. As I mentioned, the concentrations have come down quite a bit from the peak that we observed late summer. In September, the medium concentrations was around 80,000 copies per gram, and now we're about 47,000 copies per gram. Next slide. Here is some updated sequencing. So we have sequencing data through September 28th at the moment. As a reminder, we typically have sequencing data that's taken from 1 to 2 weeks ago. We are still seeing the KP variants make up the largest portions of what we are picking up, with KP.3 representing over 50% of what we are seeing. Next slide. And here's a quick map that you'll find when you go to the data dashboard. So for SARS-CoV-2, most sites are in the medium or low category. So as you can see, 2 out of the 4 regions are in the low category, which is what you'll find when you go onto the website. Next slide. Quick overview of RSV. So I know I mentioned that we've only had mostly non-detects over the last 21 days, but we are approaching that point of the year where we start to see respiratory pathogens pick up. Last year, we saw the national seasonal onset for RSV happen in mid-November. So that's about a month from now. So we're going to continue to keep an eye on this as respiratory season progresses. Next slide. Influenza A, once again, is in the low category due to limited number of detections and most sites not being in onset. Last year, we started to see the seasonal onset happen in mid to late November. So similar to RSV, we're going to keep an eye on this. Next. And EVD68. EVD68. So as I mentioned, it's in the medium category. We currently have a 75% detection rate. That's up a bit from the previous month. So we're seeing quite a few positive detections across the board. And as you can see in this plot on the right, the south, we're seeing some pretty high concentrations of EVD68. Once again, this plot can be found in the link that I believe Stephen added to the chat earlier. And we'll include a link to that in the email that we send out after the meeting. Next slide. I'm going to hand it back to Marlene.
Okay, thanks everybody. Okay, so this is a little bit different from some of all this data that you've just consumed, but we want to remind you that we actually do make quite an effort to share a lot of these overviews and this data on social media and in different ways to make it accessible. So you can look at this QR code to follow us on social media and get weekly data updates. They're not as in-depth, obviously, as what we go into in this meeting, but we hope they're useful and they're very shareable. And we also want to let you know that as we're heading into respiratory virus season, our communications team is working on this campaign to raise awareness about wastewater monitoring for respiratory viruses and encourage people to come to the data dashboard and see what's going on as we're making these measurements going into the fall and winter. So we have these really cute viruses hanging out with the pumpkins. If you're interested in amplifying any of this, we have a toolkit that we'll send around with some of these cute visuals, customizable post copy that you can also post on social channels. That's totally optional, but we want you to know about this because we're excited about it. We really hope that people will be looking at the data and using it this fall. And we think that this is a great way to encourage people to do so. And we would love to have you amplify that and work with us on it if you're interested. So let us know, follow us on social media to get those updates. Our team works really hard to put those together every week. And so we hope you appreciate them, and please let us know if you have feedback about them as well, so we can make them as useful as possible. And it did come up briefly in the chat, but a few of us will be at ID Week next week in LA. There's a session on Wednesday on wastewater monitoring that has a bunch of great speakers in the afternoon. So we will be there. If you're around, come and meet us. And then Alessandro Zulli will be presenting on the H5 paper on Friday. So if you're there, let us know and we'd love to see you. And that's it. So we have just a few more minutes for questions. So feel free to put more questions in the chat or raise your hand or speak up. And thank you again so much for taking the time to come to these meetings. I know we got to some questions in the chat during the call, but I'm sure there are more.
Hey there, can I interrupt so I don't have to type it in?
Yeah, please do.
I was asked by one of our citizens if we were planning on testing for pertussis, and I noticed that you're doing some research on it. Can you clarify whether or not you're planning on expanding that analysis to at least Coeur d'Alene, if not other sites?
We're really in the beginning of stages of doing that research right now. So we're still working on kind of in that path pathway outline that Ali showed, we're
Mhm.
working on really identifying the right assay and making sure that it's as specific as possible to pertussis into human disease. So we're a little ways away from seeing how well that works and if it would be something we deploy more widely. But it's really good to know that you have a particular interest in that, so that as we are evaluating the possibilities, and if you have any outbreaks, that happen, those are the kind of things that we kind of look to investigate on a research basis in partnership before we do any scaling up. So we have, some plans, and we've talked to, a couple sites about retrospective testing we could do. We have not done that yet. We're still in the process, but it's really good to know that you are specifically interested, because we may get back to you about that.
Cool. Yeah, I don't know if it's in the wastewater during the sampling event, but we have had a couple of cases here.
Yeah.
And I was just looking for information to relay, so I certainly will.
Yeah, I'm sorry we don't have any kind of anything to offer in terms of testing right now, but we want to keep you updated on the process and things that we're working on.
Terrific. Thank you.
Steve, go
Steve?
ahead.
Yeah, so are there plans to add the national levels overlay to the individual dashboards for EVD 68? I see it for most other things but at least on my dashboard I don't see it for EVD 68. Would find that
Yeah,
useful.
that's a great question. That's a great question. So the reason you don't see it is because as of, well, beforehand, EVD 68 detection was rare in wastewater. And so it was in the sort of infrequently detected target group, right, Amanda? But now that we're detecting it more often, it seems like maybe we should put it into a different archetype type of pathogen. So we will discuss this and see what we can do, because I agree with you, and I think we do too, that looking at the levels and trends right now anyway seems very useful for EVD 68, even though before it was not. So thank you for poking us, and we will get on that.
Thanks.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Since there are no questions coming up right now, I'll just share I was just in a workshop taking place in Portugal remotely. It's the EU consortium of wastewater-based epidemiology practitioners and partners like you all. And there was a session on communication in a lot of the countries like Luxembourg, Lithuania, and Portugal were talking about the importance of like communication with the public through media and social media about wastewater surveillance. So I thought that was interesting. And then of course that was our last slide today was about that.